All right, well, let's go on ahead and continue with Elvis and Kathy. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit all notifications, and if you do happen to get a little commercial here on YouTube, just wait for it so you can skip it. It's not going to take very long, maybe 10, 15 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. I've seen pretty short ones, so let's get through here. We ended on page 15. This is a book that's very hard to get out of print. In some cases, up to $3,000 online. Normally costs you $700-800 for this book, and I bought it for y'all here on Rare Elvis Photos. All right, so Las Vegas is a town of big shows and big names and big stars. And as visitors come from little towns and big cities to see them perform, they are lured to the gambling tables and slot machines with promises of gigantic jackpots. Let me get some light here so y'all can read a little bit better with me. Or if you're just driving, obviously you're just listening. All right. It's a town that never sleeps and thrives on continuous excitement. But for a performer, it can be as dull and boring as watching a rock grow. You live for your time on stage, prepare for it like an athlete getting ready for the big event. Singers should rest a great deal because their vocal cords are a highly sensitive instrument. I slept late, ate breakfast, tried to find some sun in a private place, and then it was time to get ready for the next performance. I seldom went into the lobby area and most of the time made my way to the show through the service elevator and then the kitchen. After each show, those first few days, I was so tired and wrung dry that I would eat something and then head for my room to read or write letters. I left all the glamour on the stage and became just plain Kathy Westmoreland, singer, hard worker, who was a bit homesick for my friends and family, my horses and my puppies back in Los Angeles. I was in glamorous Las Vegas, but I might as well have been on an isolated farm in North Dakota because it was very confining. We were sleeping when most people were working, and we had little time for sightseeing or visiting friends outside the people working in the show. I didn't mind because my career was the center of my life. I didn't want anything to deter me, and since I hadn't had an intimate relationship with a man, I didn't mind leading such a cloistered life. In other words, what you haven't had, you don't miss. Of course, I was caught between two generations, one that frowned on any kind of sex outside of marriage, and another that saw sex as an expression of freedom. Because of my strict upbringing and church-oriented background, I believed that sex with only one lifetime partner was acceptable. There was clear-cut choice between the two philosophies. You certainly couldn't choose both, and my beliefs were more widely accepted by society at the time. The freedom was sometimes based upon rebellion. I was independent, but I certainly wasn't a rebel. So we're talking in the 70s right now. A couple of times, the rhythm guitar player in the band asked me to join him at another club in order to catch somebody else's act, and I did. It was strictly friendship. He was someone to be with for a few short hours before going to my room and resting for the show. I certainly wasn't going to complicate my life with even a casual relationship at that point, and frankly, I was very content with the way things were going. Also, I was hired to be the Elvis Presley show for only 2 weeks, and I was thinking and planning for future auditions, setting up some studio and record dates in order to keep working. I was just as glad that my time was limited on the Elvis show because they were going on tour right after Las Vegas, and I really hated being on the road. I had my fill of touring when I was with the Metropolitan Opera National Company and the Sandpipers, and the thought of doing it again horrified me. However, I must say that the Metropolitan Opera National Tour wasn't at all that bad because we stayed in one city for a longer period of time. It took a great deal of effort and money to put up the elaborate sets, and the company had to have a long run in order for the engagement to pay for itself. The Sandpipers were another matter. We sat up all night in airports and then went right after the performance. We were responsible for all the instruments, luggage, dragging everything from city to city. The travel arrangements were not the best. We had no road manager most of the time, or our dates were so close together, excuse me, and the locations so far apart, and we barely made it on the road for the next show. Those road trips were disorganized. There seemed to be just one disaster after another. And although I cherish the memories and the friendships I have with the Sandpipers, I wasn't about to travel again, and I'd vowed myself that I would stay in one place, do studio dates or whatever, but I was not going back on the road. I would laugh now thinking about all of my smug resolutions as if I was always going to be in full control of my life and my lifestyle. All right, now, so she's talking about her show. Finally, we get back to Elvis here a little bit here. Nice little background on Kathy. During the first week I was in Las Vegas, Priscilla Presley, Elvis's wife, came to town and the two of them made a very striking couple. She was beautiful, wore gorgeous clothes and jewelry, and she seemed very sophisticated and worldly for her age. That's what everybody says. She acted older than she was. But something strange happened backstage the night she arrived, and I was too innocent at the time to figure it out. Elvis came up to me and said, "If anyone asks you, be sure to tell them you're engaged and plan to get married. Please do this for me." It seemed bewildering, but I agreed. Who would possibly even ask me that kind of question, I wondered. However, days later, when I finally asked him about it, he answered, "Well, you're unattached and new to the show, and a lot of the wives know you're here, and they're very jealous, or they get very jealous. They'll think you're sleeping with their husbands, and it'll upset everybody." I never even considered that it could have been anything at all to do with Elvis and Priscilla, but obviously it was. We know Priscilla was pretty jealous, and a lot of people think she had a right to be. Obviously, John Wilkinson, the rhythm guitar player I mentioned earlier, had asked me to catch another act after work. John was tall, good-looking, and he had a warm smile and eyes. He was always pleasant enough, and since we both worked on the Elvis show and loved music, we never lacked for things to talk about, so I agreed to go with him. After the midnight performance, I waited for John, but he didn't show up, which seemed strange to me at the time. Then, to my surprise, one of Elvis's bodyguards, Sonny West, came up to me with an invitation. I didn't know many of the names at the time, but I remembered Sonny, who was one of the bodyguards, often referred jokingly as the Memphis Mafia. "Elvis wants you to join a party he's having up in the suite," he said, and then he added, "He just wants to get to know you as a friend." Right away, I recalled a hurried conversation with Millie before she left the show. We never got a chance to talk music or what was expected of me as her replacement, but I remembered her immediately saying, "If you get a chance, go up to the Elvis penthouse suite and take a look. It's just like a movie set." In the short time I'd been there, I knew Elvis always had parties in his suite after every show, but I'd never been included and honestly never expected to be. However, when your boss, and Elvis was my boss at the time, asks you to join a party, then you just try to make an appearance at least. Besides, I was curious to see the penthouse suite and to see what Elvis was like when he was off stage. It wasn't really as if I had a choice, but I sensed a real sensitivity to Elvis and knew that since he had made a special point of asking me, he would be hurt if I didn't show up. And having a party after the show was a nightly occurrence, which in itself was unusual because most stars entertain perhaps once before a show opens or when it closes. Show stars are usually exhausted after 2 grueling hours on stage, but Elvis never seemed to tire, and he never stopped performing. He would do one show on stage and another at his party after the show. I didn't know then, but found out later that Elvis had more energy than all of us put together. The penthouse suite was on the 30th floor, and the view that greeted me was magnificent. Las Vegas stretched before my eyes in all its neon glory, and the suite itself was very luxurious, done in gold and yellows, a long mirrored bar, 3 kitchens, thick carpeting, separate dining room and kitchen, with magnificent crystal chandeliers reflecting shimmering light. Millie was right. It was just like a movie set. I'm going to go back to here. I didn't know then, but found out later that Elvis had more energy than all of us put together. That was really what a lot of people talked about Elvis, how he just burned the candle at both ends, and he didn't seem to get tired. And it's a shame, it's a shame he died at 42, obviously. But he, in his 42 years of life, he lived 80 or 100 of them because of all that he did, the lack of sleep that he got, the amount of stuff that he put into every single day, from reading to being with fans to learning music to doing acting to learning scripts, all that stuff. Just an amazing kind of thing to think about when you're thinking about Elvis. Yes, he died at 42, but really, in that 42-year-old body was at least a 100-year-old man. All right, here we go. When I got there, the party was already underway. Mostly the Memphis Mafia, with 10 to 12 pretty girls, all well-dressed. I had heard that the bodyguards were always on the lookout for the prettiest girls in the audience, and then would dangle the prospect of meeting Elvis in front of them, and the girls were delighted to accept their invitations. It was all a harmless game, and the bodyguards and women were usually pretty well behaved. If I was worried about the party turning into a brawl, I needn't have, because I found out later that Elvis did not drink and didn't like people drinking too much in front of him. He also disapproved of hard drugs and pot, so his parties weren't wild like some people like to imagine. They were all pretty tame. Elvis hadn't arrived by the time I got there, and since I really didn't know anyone in the room, I wandered around looking at the view. Noticing a plaque sitting on a table in the living room, I went over to take a look. It read, "I never knew a guitar player that was worth a damned." Signed, Vernon Presley. Vernon Elvis Presley. Someone had mentioned Elvis carried it with him wherever he went. I finally settled in on a sofa near the window and chatted with a few of the women for a while, and then he made an appearance. And when Elvis entered the room, he completely took over. It wasn't that he meant to, but he had such a magnetic personality, so much charisma, he simply became the center of the space he occupied. Many entertainers and extroverts have forceful personalities and love to draw attention to themselves. But believe me, this was something much more honest, more subtly powerful, so very different and compelling. This night, he was wearing a beautiful black velvet suit and a high collar. He looked just like a prince. And as usual, everybody's eyes were on him. Elvis made his way across the room, stopping here and there, speaking casually to a few people. But he headed right toward me and he said, "Hello." He sat down next to me on the sofa and put his arms around my shoulder. I sat there and tried to refrain from squirming and finally regained my composure. Elvis sat close to me, his legs crossed and his foot wiggling, which I learned later was a nervous habit of his. "I'm glad you could make it," he said. Later, whenever I think of that statement, I just have to laugh because I found out that Elvis had approached John Wilkinson and asked him how serious he was about me. Evidently, he knew I had gone out a couple times with him, and that surprised me. John assured Elvis that we only had a casual friendship, so Elvis told him that he was going to ask me out, which explains why my date never showed up. Of course, I didn't know that at the time and was really stunned that Elvis was paying so much attention to me with so many beautiful women around. It isn't that I have a serious complex about the way I look, but I'm not a glamour girl. I'm a small woman with a big voice, a happy personality, but I'm not a leggy, balsamy, bosomy, show top girl, nor did I ever see myself as a model. That's what I was surprised. That's why I was surprised Elvis was sitting with his arm around me. But then I thought, since he was happily married, he could just be looking for a friend to talk to, and talk we did. Our conversation ran the gamut from our families to horses and then some. He was impressed that Daddy had sung and appeared in The Great Caruso and The Student Prince. He told me how he loved those movies. We talked about my working in Daddy's record shop, Breezy's Melody Mart, at the time. Elvis revolutionized the record industry from the quiet little record shop selling easy listening 70s to 3 stores packed with teenagers buying rock and roll 45s, especially Elvis records. And I said, "Thank you, you did a lot for my family." We were just beginning to get to know one another when he took me by the hand and said, "Excuse us," and pulled me into his bedroom, which was really small, sweet in the sitting room, bedroom, and bath. The bed was up on a pedestal. The room had vivid green and blue velvet drapes. The bed had The room had vivid green and blue velvet drapes. The bed had blue and green velvet drapes hanging from the canopy. The overall effect was very regal. We sat down on a sofa in the sitting room, and kept talking. "Don't be nervous or worried, Kathy. I won't hurt you. There's really no place but the bedroom where we can be alone, and I just want to talk to you." I nodded, but I was nervous, and he knew it. I immediately spotted a book on the nearby table by Joel L. Goldsmith called The Infinite Way, and I relaxed because I knew then that we really had something in common besides the show, because that was the book that Jackie Allen had given me several months earlier. "Oh, I've been reading this book," I said. "You have?" He sounded a bit surprised. "This is one of my favorites. I like to read some of the passages I like best." Then he took the book from my hands, began to thumb through it, and finally found what he wanted and began to read. His voice was soft and comforting. "There's a way whereby we are able to rid ourselves of sin, sickness, poverty, and the results of wars and economic changes. This way is the exchanging of our material sense of existence for the understanding and consciousness of life and spiritual illumination." Elvis thumbed through some more pages again and began to read once more. "Illumination first brings peace, then confidence and assurance. It brings rest from the world's contests, and then all good flows to us through grace. We see now that we do not live by acquiring, gaining, or achieving. We live by grace. We possess all as the gift of God, so we do not get our good because we already have all good. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine." I always feel so relaxed when I read that, don't you? Elvis seemed to be enjoying himself, and I was trying very hard to get rid of the tension that I felt. But I was still slightly uncomfortable. In spite of my show business background, I wasn't used to being in a man's bedroom, and in my very puritanical way, I didn't think that it was a proper place to be. And another thing that may shock readers is that I wasn't attracted to Elvis in any physical way. He just wasn't my type. I had never had what you might call a steady boyfriend, but those men I did date were the rugged outdoor type. Elvis was absolutely beautiful, with the richest blue eyes I've ever seen and skin that looked like velvet. Although they photographed thicker and rougher on his screen, his hands were slender and graceful with long tapered fingers. He was masculine and athletic, but he also exuded an almost feminine like quality, which I found intriguing. Then we began to talk, and the more I listened to him, the more fascinated I became. He was unlike any man I had ever met. Elvis was searching for spiritual truth, and so was I. He was trying to open up his mind and discover certain truths about religion and life. I was on the same search and was drawn to his quick mind, his ability to understand immediately some of my own doubts and my hopes for a true spiritual awakening. Of course, we opened the discussion with our feelings about the Goldsmith book, which explored the possibility of surrendering material distractions through the attainment of spiritual consciousness. This struck me as incongruous considering his astounding wealth. Neither of us had answers, but I found it intriguing that Elvis was even interested in such a profound and deep subject. I began to see him in a completely different light. I have another book I'd like to show you too, The Impersonal Life. I'll read it to you someday and get you a copy. It's a great way to find someone else who's reading the kind of books I love to read, he said. Tell me about yourself, he said, looking directly at me with obvious interest in what I had to say. I told him about my father, who was a singing teacher and done studio work, and how he had coached me and my sisters when convinced he really wanted to sing correctly, that they would really want to sing correctly. I also told him about the Metropolitan Opera Tour and my earlier ambitions to sing only classical music. He seemed fascinated and kept asking me questions, and when I mentioned my love for horses, he surprised me by telling me that he loved horses too. I have a great Tennessee walking horse I would love for you to see, he said proudly. Kathy said, I have an Arabian that is going to be in the national championship, and I'm really in love with that horse, I said, laughing. Oh, we certainly do like a lot of the same things, he said, and moved closer to me. But even with all this in common, I was really still much on guard. Elvis suddenly leaned over and kissed me. I just crossed my eyes in a crazy sort of way and started laughing, which really upset Elvis. Why are you laughing? He didn't sound pleased or the least bit amused. I'm sorry, it's nothing personal, but I can't take this seriously. After all, you are a married man, and I just can't handle that sort of thing. Elvis stood up and walked away from me. He remained standing with his back to me for a few moments and then turned around. You know, I'm married, Kathy, but we aren't committed to each other. We have given each other permission to take each other's, to have other relationships. Well, I later found out that wasn't true. Elvis gave himself permission, but he wasn't too possessive to give his wife, but he was much too possessive to give his wife permission. It was simply the old double standard that exists in many male-female relationships. So I'll stop right there. At this point in time, Priscilla had already had her affair. Kathy didn't know that, and I don't even know whether she knew that when she wrote this book. Maybe she didn't read Priscilla and Me, or Elvis and Me, I'm sorry. But that's certainly was the truth at that point in time. So I'm gonna continue on, and we'll wrap it up for the next episode we have of Elvis and Kathy. But no matter what the situation was between Elvis and Priscilla, I wasn't interested in becoming involved with him and made an awkward attempt to explain why. I stammered. I'm saying that is that I'm well. You see, Elvis, what I'm trying to say is that, and then I blurted it out, I'm still a virgin. I couldn't believe I was saying that to the sex symbol of the world. I only wanted him to know I intended to wait for my husband, whoever that might be. I sounded so defensive and apologetic, but I was really proud of the fact that peer pressure hadn't led me to do anything I didn't want to do. Elvis smiled approvingly. That's wonderful, honey. There's nothing wrong with that. I respect you for waiting. It means you have principles, and I like that. It really means a lot to me. What I didn't know was that telling Elvis I was a virgin made his interest in me more intense. It wasn't that he was out to conquer all the virgins of the world, but he respected virginity, and he cherished women who thought enough of themselves to want love before sex. It was obvious that his interest in me had grown because before the night was over, he took my hand and said, "Kathy, I want to see more of you. I want to be with you. I know we are going to be good friends." I'll have to admit that he attracted me more after our long talk. At least he attracted me mentally and spiritually. I had loved talking to him, and he seemed to understand everything I said, and I understood what he was saying. It was truly a meeting of the minds, but I still didn't like the idea of seeing a married man so privately, so I told him how I felt. Elvis looked at me for the longest and said, "Please think it over." Elvis was not full of surprises on the stage. Sorry. Elvis was not only full of surprises on the stage, but in real life too, because he took me gently by the hand after saying that and walked me out of his suite and down to my room. Nobody ever saw us leave, and there was no bodyguard with us. I realize now how unusual it was to be alone with Elvis on an elevator and walking down a hall with nobody following us. Then he kissed me on the cheek and said goodnight. I had been a little afraid for a moment in the bedroom that we might have some kind of wrestling match, but Elvis had way too much class for that, and I was very pleased. After 30 minutes later, as I was getting ready for bed, the telephone rang and it was Elvis. "I hope I didn't frighten you tonight," he said softly. "No, not at all. I enjoyed our talk. I didn't want to admit that I actually was scared to death. I really feel comfortable with you, and I want you to feel all right," he said. I'm fine. Everything's all right," I told him. But I wasn't fine. I was confused and felt more like a little lost. I didn't go to sleep right away that night, as I usually did. Instead, I kept running our conversation over and over in my mind and remembering the way he looked when he smiled at me, the way he looked when he talked to me, and even the way I felt when he kissed me so casually. I tried to push it out of my mind. I didn't want to think about it, but our conversation kept whirling through my brain, and suddenly I was terribly afraid. In my secret heart, I knew I had just met up with something too strong for me to cope with. For the first time in my life, which up to then had been so organized and career-oriented, I felt out of control. What I didn't want to face and refuse to admit, even to myself, was that for the first time in my life, I had fallen head over heels in love, and that man was married. It was a shattering realization. I tried to rationalize it by thinking, if I hadn't been in his room that night, wouldn't he have simply found someone else? If it bothered him, why should it bother me? Sorry, if it didn't bother him, why should it bother me? One moment I wanted to pack up and run away, and the next moment I longed to have Elvis hold me in his arms and kiss me again. No matter what happened, I knew for certain that this episode of my life just couldn't have a happy ending. All right, so that was the first chapter. Let's start on chapter 2 for everybody here. We'll read a little bit, and then we'll continue on the next series. So make sure you like, hit notifications, subscribe, all the good stuff. And then there's podcasts, and there's going to be an Elvis and Kathy podcast where you're going to find all the readings. And then, of course, there's a Child Bride podcast already, and we'll continue with that book as well. Chapter 2, Life is But a Day at Most, Robert Burns. I was suddenly startled out of my long reverie when I felt the plane dropping altitude for a landing. We were back in Las Vegas where it all started, and I needed air desperately. When we were on the ground, I told comedian Jackie Kahane that I wanted to get off the plane for a moment and get some fresh air. "No, Kathy, you can't do that. The airport is swarming with reporters just waiting to nab any one of us. I think it's best if you just stay right here." I knew the last thing I wanted to do right then was to talk to the press, so I stayed, and at last we took off again, this time for Los Angeles. I don't know how, but someone had called my home, and Colette Doty, a friend who took care of my horses and worked for me, was waiting for me at LAX. She was also the one who brought me to the airport only a few hours before. I still don't know how they managed it, but we all got out of that airport without speaking to one reporter, although I understand that there were newspaper, magazines, and television people that were everywhere. Ducking reporters at both airports made me think about what I had said in Pueblo. Someone said, "Well, it's over," after hearing that Elvis had died. No, I said, it's not over yet. This is not the end. Actually, it's not even over today. It's not over even today is what Kathy just said. Like, when she wrote this book in 95, I think. All the way home, maybe 87, sorry. All the way home, driving silently with Colette, I thought over... let me take a real quick at when this book was written. I truly don't really know. Yeah, 87. August of 87. All the way home, driving silently with Colette, I thought of the last telephone call I had received from Elvis. He had just phoned to talk, which was not unusual. I remember saying, "Why another tour? Why not rest? You're sick, Elvis, and you should just forget working for a while. Tours and concerts just take too much out of you." "I can't, Kathy. I can't stop right now. The Colonel owes a lot of money in gambling debts, and some of the guys will be in bad financial shape if I don't keep working. They have families to look over. I have 300 people who depend on me." What had seemed so important to Elvis only a few days before certainly wasn't very important now. But then I faced another fact. I know Elvis could have stayed home waiting for time to pass. I know Elvis couldn't have stayed home waiting for time to pass. He always had to be on the go, out there touching his fans, singing and entertaining. Staying home for Elvis would have just been another kind of death, one that he couldn't have tolerated. "The telephone at home has been ringing off the hook," Colette told me, and that didn't surprise me, and I couldn't think of anyone I really wanted to talk to right then except Elvis, and now that was never going to happen again. When we got home to my house, I refused to look at my messages and went right to my room. I was bone weary and fell across the bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Elvis and how it all started. And the past came back to me as if it happened yesterday. Later, I realized that it was 7 years to the very day from the time I met him until the day he died. What a profound coincidence. After the very first visit to Elvis's penthouse suite, I had been more than a little confused. That fateful morning seemed so far away and yet so close. I had no idea then that it was to be the turning point in my life. My mind turned back again to Las Vegas, the morning after my first visit to Elvis's suite, and the thought of that day just 7 years ago seemed like a century away, and the bittersweet memory brought tears to my eyes. I remember so well how I felt when I woke up. I had been dreaming a vivid, colorful Disney dream, hearing the song, "A dream is a wish your heart makes. A dream is your wish your heart makes." Was I Cinderella? He certainly was Prince Charming. So Kathy's going back to that very next morning. In the light of day, everything seemed more clear, and I felt I had my strange feelings under control. I was surprised at the way my mind had been working the sleepless night before. First and foremost was my upbringing. Because my father's position was in the church, I had spent most of my formative years attending Sunday school or singing in the choir. I also had been a steady churchgoer even as a teenager because attending all church functions was mandatory in our household. I attended the Southern Methodist Church for 10 years and was a member of the Congregational Church for 1 year and 10 years in the Baptist Church. My daily diet of morality was now a part of me. Sex before marriage was simply not condoned by me or any church I ever attended. But one of the most sinful things of all was to commit adultery. And Elvis was very married, no matter what he said about his arrangement with Priscilla. And he was the father of a child. Actually, this was the most sobering thought of all, having an affair with a married man. I feared the consequences much more than I feared losing my virginity. I vowed then and there that I would never see Elvis Presley socially again, and I certainly wouldn't be alone with him in his bedroom. We are going to end it right there, page 31. And once again, stay posted. Keep watching for my Army Days with Elvis, Friendship, Football, and Follies by Johnny Lang. And Richard's right here. And then, of course, I'm going to continue reading Child Bride as well. That certainly has to get out there. And, I appreciate greatly every one of you that leave me comments, that are thankful for this page. And, I'm thankful for all of you. Thankful for all the love you have for Elvis. And, the other pages that are out there defending Elvis as well. Until next time, just remember, as I always say, take care of yourself. Don't settle for less than you deserve. If you're lonesome, you don't have a friend, reach out. There's a lot of people making friends on this page as well. Leave comments. You'll get responses from other Elvis fans. And, know you're not alone. You're in this community of Elvis fans, and we know Elvis Presley was a very giving, loving soul. And he didn't want y'all to be alone. He didn't want you to feel alone, and you could hear it in his music when he sang. You could hear it in the vibrato and the emotion that Elvis Presley was singing to give you a message of love, a message of fun, a message of spirituality. And that's what we're going to try to focus on here, and to continue to defend Elvis from what Priscilla did. Priscilla being the executive producer of the Priscilla movie, where it made Elvis look like a broody, abusive, unhappy person. And when really, we're seeing, Elvis had a lot of spirituality. He had love for people. He had love for his fans. Uh, Lots of jokes and good times in this book as well. So certainly got to get to this Johnny Lang book. I know it's on Amazon, so if y'all want to buy it, that's pretty easy to find on Amazon. Just type in Miami Days with Elvis, Friendship, Football, and Follies by Johnny Lang. So, alrighty. Well, until next time, this is Rare Elvis Photos. Thanks again. And remember, take a look at my my page, my playlist, my podcast, and you're going to be able to see where these are all at.